the panelists, and I'm certain you have the list of the panelists with you. And probably the moment you mention the name, then the participant will be able, the panelists will be able to begin their presentation. But there are participants online, and I think we are about to set off. Thank you.
Lamek, what had agreed with Patrick? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, have you, is Patrick near you there? No, he's at home.
Yeah, we are in different places, yes.
Yes. What I was saying is because I was on the road and I'm having internet complications.
Yes.
I'd wanted to introduce, then I let you continue, yeah?
Okay.
Continue moderating.
Okay.
Because I was trying, the laptop has actually failed to connect completely. Now I'm on the phone, but the phone is also being so much interrupted, so I cannot rely on it to disorganize the whole thing.
Okay.
So I had wanted just to make welcome remarks.
Yes.
And I leave you to continue moderating. When I reach another stable area, I can. Unfortunately, I won't be continuing with the flow of the conversation. But I'll try as much as possible to listen in, and then maybe can give closing remarks as well.
Okay, I think that is fine, sir. That is fine.
Are you comfortable with that?
That is fine. That is fine.
Yeah, sorry about it, but it's because of what happened yesterday, and I had to abruptly travel.
I had the prior engagement.
Okay.
Yeah. I can see Daniel. I think Daniel is already there.
Okay.
How are you, Lamek? I've raised my hand, and how are you, Chair, Mr. Mwesiga? I'm just letting you know. Yes, this is Jennifer from EAC. Our DSG is just finishing our DSG Honorable Bazivamo is just closing a meeting, and I think he'll be joining shortly.
Okay, welcome.
Yeah, an internal EAC meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Stewart?
Yes, please.
I think the first panelists are present. Probably if you could commence the meeting.
Okay. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sorry, I can only see.
Good afternoon.
I can see Daniel there. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for taking time to join in this. Unfortunately, I'm in a very unclear network connection area. I'm not sure whether Honorable Chris Bazivamo is already on. Hello? Mary from Kenya, we are ready with you. Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, okay. And Dr. Stephen Kagabo, can I say welcome, sir?
Thank you. I'm here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Mr. Leo Tenga.
I'll be representing Mr. Tenga today. My name is Frank Nafi.
You are standing in for him, yeah?
Yes.
Yes. If I can say welcome once again, and we are together fighting COVID in order to try and see how It has affected us as a business community, as manufacturers, but as well, most important, I think, for us to consider is what is going to be the post-COVID situation. How do we handle the way forward? But I want to give a minute. I will start with the lady, Madam Mary Ngechu, to introduce yourself and greet the listeners who have tuned in.
Thank you, sir. My name is Mary Ngecho from Kenya. I run and manage a business, Line Plus Group. Line Plus Group is a synergy of 3 different entities. One of the company is called Line Art Solution, where we major in flexo printing, we do offset printing, and we also do general printing. And then the other entity is Plast Packaging, where we major in manufacturing of plastic containers. We manufacture PET for food and beverage. We manufacture PET bottles also for the pharmaceutical industry. And we also manufacture HDPE for the cosmetic industry, agrochemical, and the dairy industry. We also have a third entity that we call AromaCare, is a manufacturing company that manufactures cosmetics, both hair care and body care. And we also manufacture cleaning and hygiene products, including for home industries and institutions. Among other products, we manufacture hand wash, sanitizers, disinfectant, and multi-purpose soap. And I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ngechu. You seem to have been prepared already in advance for COVID, but that's a good thing to always be prepared. Dr. Stephen Kagabo, try to be brief, sir, on the introduction so that we can go to the main points.
Okay,
welcome, Dr. Stephen.
Thank you. I already mentioned my name. I'm Stephen Kagbo, and I'm the UNIDO representative in Tanzania, but also responsible for Mauritius and the East African Community Secretariat. So I'm pleased to be here. Of course, UNIDO, I'm sure, you all know, is United Nations Industrial Development Organization. So thank you very much.
Welcome, Dr. Stephen. Honorable Chris Bazivamo. Hello. It seems he's not on.
The DSG is just finishing a meeting, a regional meeting, but here the representative is saying he will be joining in.
Okay. Then we can have Mr. Tenga introduce himself. Then we continue like that. Mr. Tenga, sir, welcome. Mr. Tenga, sir, Executive Director.
Yeah, I said I will be representing Mr. Tenga. My name is Frank Daffa. I'm a policy analyst at CTI. And basically, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to get a regional coalition on the best approach to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic as it affected the manufacturing sector. So I believe we'll come up with a very good recommendation and approach towards alleviating the sector. So once again, I thank you all for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Executive Director. Daniel, are you ready, sir? Executive Director Uma.
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah. I'm ready, Stuart.
Yes, please.
Yes, well, my name is Daniel Verunzi. I'm the Executive Director at the Uganda Manufacturers Association. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Lamek? Yes, please. Lamek?
Yes, sir.
I think you first take over from now as I settle this connection again.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon once again, and thank you, Director Stewart, for that opening session. I think we are now going into the main subject matter for today, and apologies, my video on the computer had some issues, so I could not connect on video. But as we begin, probably as you can see on the projection, we have some ground rules, which I'm certain you are all viewing on your screens. Of course, you'll be expected to mute our microphones whenever we are not speaking. Of course, mutual respect of each other's views, then contributing to the goals, staying on point, of course, regional focus and focusing on the topic, raising your hand to ask questions, and then, of course, questions can be sent to the chat room. And for purposes of this meeting, we shall be recording. There is a production unit which will be recording our discussions. Those are some of the ground rules to which we shall be applying in the course of our meeting. By names, I'm called Lamek Wesonga. I'm the manager in charge of policy and standards at the East African Business Council Secretariat. As our topic goes, we are trying to analyze or assess the impact of COVID-19 on the EAC manufacturing sector. And as you well know, the ongoing COVID-19 presents a significant challenge to EAC economies due to its strong links with the world in terms of trade, business, and investment. The EAC manufacturing, with its current contribution of 9.7% to the regional GDP, with a projection of about 25% by 2032, is one of the critical sectors that are being impacted by this pandemic. One, in terms of sourcing of raw materials, intermediate and capital goods from countries that have been heavily hit by the outbreak of COVID-19. And of course, from our regional perspective, we have seen partner states coming up with several measures that are aimed at curbing the outbreak of COVID-19. And some of these measures are either impacting negatively or positively to our sectors, and manufacturing has not been spared. So some of these measures, of course, we have seen lockdowns in some partner states, of course, which have led to restrictions on the movement of goods, of persons, and this has affected labor supply to the industrialists or the manufacturers. The closures of several businesses, such as wholesale, retail. Of course, when wholesale is not working, then it means the factories are not supplying. Recently, it has been reported that some factories had actually resorted to supplying to the final consumers, to which this seems to be a huge cost. So whereas we are looking at some of the positive aspects in our discussion today, we shall also be analyzing the other negative impacts. And then, given the impact of COVID-19 on the EAC manufacturing sector, the EABC Secretariat thought it as wise to organize this webinar to capture some of the experts' views and draw up recommendations which we shall use as a secretariat in informing policy at a regional level. Of course, Director Stewart has already introduced the panelists who are so far present, and I think without wasting time, let me begin with the Confederation of Tanzania Industries, the representative of the Executive Director, Mr. Dafa Frank. Mr. Dafa, we realize that within the region, we have been impacted with this COVID-19. From your own perspective, what could be the current state of play of the manufacturing sector in the region amidst this pandemic. Of course, trying to bring in the context of local, then regional, and then international trade. Mr. Dafa, please, you're welcome.
Okay, asante. To begin with, let me thank EABC once again for this opportunity and for this meeting. I believe it is very useful to get the views and actually consensus on what should we do as the manufacturing sector in the region. So maybe just to begin, at CTI we conducted a survey in late March to try and assess the situation on what industries have been facing in terms of their sales, their production, their revenue, employment, and all other factors to try to determine what has been the impact of COVID-19. So according to our survey, it was found approximately 98% of industries in Tanzania have been affected by COVID-19. And mainly the issues now will be divided locally, internationally, and regionally as I go. So among the local challenges that have been faced by industries, the main one has been the slowdown in production. This we come to know because most of the industries rely on imports from abroad, and the lockdowns that happened in different nations somehow delayed the raw materials and resulted into delays in exports. So all of these eventually affected production, and some of the industries had to cut production to more than 50% of their current production due to the loss in their export market and due to delays in some of their raw materials. But also there's been an increasing operational cost for companies. As we know now, companies have to put some employees on paid leaves. They also have to take these hygiene measures, which are extra into their operational costs. So all of these somehow lead to an increasing running cost of their industry. But the most impactful one has been the loss of employment. As we know, industries, when they face challenges in production, they have to find a way to at least sustain themselves. So they have laid off some workers, especially the ones that we know who will be most impacted are the ones who are casual labor, because casual labor usually they depend on how much the operations are ongoing. So if the operations are down, then most of the casual laborers will end up unpaid and will end up not having any jobs. So those have been some of the local impacts, including the loss in sales and other challenges. But when we look at the regional side, we have seen the increasing resurgence. For myself, I call it the NTB virus, which has now started to arise in our region as we see more and more restrictions to cross-border trade. I've been talking to some of our members, and especially in the Rusumo border, some of them have reported their trucks staying at the border for more than 20 days. So these have been a challenge which has been recurring. And to date, I've heard that there is a way that they have found, they have tried to resolve the situation, but they say you have to pay an extra $500 or 700,000 Tanzania shillings to get an escort to go to Rwanda. Or sometimes some of the drivers have been forced to change, to rotate. So if you have your car and it is driven by a Tanzanian, when you get at the border, you have to switch drivers to a Ugandan, so that the good reaches to your customer. So all of this adds into the increasing transport cost, and it slows down movement of goods to more than 10 days, which previously was not there. Again, this ends up to stress production and slows down everything in industry. So in terms of international, I think some of the issues I've already highlighted, but we have had some industries that have had challenges to access some expatriates who, some of them had already been paid for working permits and all other permits, but due to COVID-19, they could not travel into the country. We have had some industries facing challenges in investment because some of the capital inflows depend on these countries that are facing lockdown. But the major one has been the declining in exports and sometimes imports, especially as we know most of our industries depend on China and India for trade. So their trade ties have been hugely affected. I had a member with me today who was saying they used to import around 500 containers and now they have cut down their importation to nearly 300 containers because of the delays and all these restrictions in terms of importation. So in terms of international trade, we know the main impact has been on investment, exportation, and importation. Apart from the increasing devastation of this pandemic to the industry, there has been some positive impacts because we have seen some industries repurposing their production. For example, here in Tanzania, we had at CTI, we have a member who was producing paper products, a paper converter, and now he has added a line to produce face masks. So this is a trend that we are seeing right now. But also we have seen some other industries in textile that their main product was mainly fabric and maybe kanga and kitenge, but now they are diversifying in production of masks and such kind of products. So some industries have begun to repurpose their production activities to meet the increasing demand for sanitizers, for masks, medicine, and such kind of products. But also we have seen a new trend of local sourcing. So some of the industries, due to challenges in importation, they have resorted to sourcing locally some of the materials that can be sourced here, which I think for me is a strong point going forward. We can, as a manufacturing sector and as a private sector organizations, we can look at the best way to really amplify this so that our industries can build resilience in terms of sourcing locally. There's also has been a good growth in IT industry. We can see that the increasing demand for online facilities and out of office facilities to conduct meetings, to engage with each other has resulted to the increasing demand for IT products. So this has also resulted to a bit of a boom in that side of industry. In terms of supporting measures, I would say for Tanzania, industries have been very grateful to have the assurance of the government. We have seen other countries taking serious lockdown measures and closure of industries and all that. But in Tanzania, the assurance that we have constantly obtained from the government that there will be a no lockdown has really boosted the investor and industry's confidence to continue production and to try to mitigate measures that to mitigate challenges that they are facing currently. So the assurance from the government and from His Excellency Dr. John Pombe Magufuli has really been a big boost for industries to continue production. But of recently, about a week ago, we had some few monetary measures that were taken by the central bank, which aimed to increase liquidity to commercial banks, just as a way to try and cope with the current situation. Also, this has been very helpful. Specifically, we can see that the central bank has even allowed commercial banks to negotiate terms for the loans and things like collateral with businesses. So this can be very helpful for businesses which are currently facing liquidity challenges to repay their loans. And we believe it will be helpful going forward. But we are also hopeful with the coming budget. CTA has been participating in the discussions for formulation of the financial budgets for 2021. And we believe there are some good positive indications from our initial discussions that the budget which we expect to be read next week will have some good indications on, not next week, the week after next week. We believe there will be some good indications on what policy measures the government will be undertaking to alleviate businesses from the current challenges of COVID-19. Maybe to skip to mitigation measures. The initial...
maybe Mr. Daffa?
Yes.
Just hold on. I think you raise very critical points, arising from your local, regional, and international perspective. Of course, you state that there has been a slowdown, of course, in production because of especially the industries which have been relying on importation of raw materials from outside, and of course the increased operational costs. And then you also talked about loss of employment because, of course, when you are not in production, it means there will be an idle labor force. Of course, if the workers are going on leave, some of them are paid, some of them are not paid. And then you also raise the issue of the NTB syndrome, which you very well said that at the Rusumo border, issues of $500 of paying the escorts to take you through another partner states, and then costs around relay driving. You also went to the international level and talked about the challenges with investment, the capital, the declining exports, and then you saw a reduction in the, for example, the number of containers which a business person used to import and what they are actually importing. And then, of course, you went ahead to also talk about the positives. We have seen industries repurpose some of their production lines. Somebody who was doing plastics is doing sanitizer. Somebody who was doing paper is also doing sanitizers and producing even other PPE equipment. So we see this one is positive on the side of COVID-19. And of course, the increase in the local sourcing of raw materials. And how do we now try to maintain such kind of a trend? I think before we go into my next question to you, of which you will wrap up with some of the key mitigation measures which we would propose, I would encourage our participants who are with us to please submit in your questions. We have a team from the Secretariat which will be taking all your questions, and at an appropriate time, we'll be able to respond to all of them. And allow me, before Mr. Dafa, you can proceed, allow me to recognize the presence of Honorable Christopher Zivamo, the Deputy Secretary General of the East African Community, who is in charge of production and social sectors. Karibu sana, Honorable. Dafa, maybe as we wind up, what are some of these key mitigation measures and some of the post-COVID-19 strategies which you would propose such that moving forward, we know that for us to be able to get through this pandemic, this is what we should be doing for our manufacturing sector. Over to you, Dafa.
Thank you, Lamek. The issues have been, I think they're unique for every industry and every sector depending on the region. But for Tanzania, we have been having a long outstanding challenge of unpaid services, unpaid goods, and unpaid claims on some of the taxes that some of our members have been paying to the government. So one of our proposals has always been that we request the government of Tanzania and across the region to fast-track payments of these outstanding claims on taxes such as VAT. For Tanzania, we have a unique case where we have a 15% additional import duty on industrial sugar, but also for the services and goods that have been supplied to different government projects and programs. But another one has been to reduce the payroll burden on industries. So for Tanzania, we have a 4.5 skills development levy that has been a challenge for a long time, and we have been requesting for reduction of that levy. And another measure we've requested is to reduce the pay as you earn on the employees. This would also allow them to get some disposable income to spend, which currently there's been a decline in spending. So we believe if consumers get a relief on their income, they would increase their spending. But another measure we have requested for has been a reduction for value-added tax. Tanzania, we have an 18% VAT. So we request a reduction of that VAT, maybe to around 16%. And also we request a reduction in corporate income tax for companies. All of these are just to try to give some liquidity to the companies so that they can alleviate some of the challenges that they are facing due to COVID-19. But also one that we keep emphasizing on is to ensure that economic activities continue running, that we don't have a shutdown which would result to industries that are currently operating and having their raw materials, having their production processes suffer losses due to shutdown. Another proposal from our side has been on just to promote consumption locally. So this can be done through a deliberate government approach. They can subsidize some of the SMEs that are maybe we believe SMEs would be most hit by this pandemic. So the government should set up mechanisms to subsidize and promote SMEs and agricultural processing industries so that they can at least get some liquidity and move forward with production. And also, we have had an opportunity to propose to the industries. I think this will be most of a post-COVID approach, which we say now as manufacturers also we have a responsibility. So there's need for individual industries with the help of organizations such as EABC and CTI and the like to help prepare post-COVID recovery plans for industry. We know most of them have been affected in marketing, in sales, in employment, in production. All of these kinds of aspects of their businesses have been affected. So we would prefer for industries to engage in such strategies, but also for organizations such as CTI, which is supposed to serve manufacturers, to at least build the capacity for industries to recover post-COVID. But also industries, we encourage them now in the ongoing situation to ensure that they adhere to consumer welfare approaches, which are to ensure that their prices are not abusive, that the products that consumers get are within the hygiene requirements that the current conditions require. But also industries should support their workforce, because we know some of these employees live in environments and conditions that could be depriving. So they should make sure that their employees are safeguarded. They should provide them with safety gears, masks, sanitizers, even transportation if possible, or some meals, some sort of allowance for employees to be protected a bit more from being exposed to this pandemic. So those are from me from now. Yeah, for now that's.
Thank you, Mr. Daffa, for those proposals. I think if there are any questions, participants will be sending in their questions. We will not review them at the moment. But allow me now go to the Executive Director of the Uganda Manufacturers Association, Mr. Daniel Birungi. You're very much welcome. And from you, we would be looking at what could be the opportunities that have been availed by this COVID in the manufacturing sector. Like you've briefly heard from the previous speakers, not all it has been lost as a result of COVID. So what are some of these opportunities? Karibuni, Mr. Virungi.
Thank you very much, Lamek. Mine is quite interesting because this COVID outbreak has really been an opportunity to review operations of manufacturing entities, especially in Uganda. And we are finding quite a number of opportunities have arisen. One of them has been that we are well aware that there's a global inadequacy in supply of PPE materials. This has been well documented internationally. And as a result of that, we've been able to repurpose a lot of our production to focus on production of PPEs. one of the first areas that our manufacturers went into was in the production of sanitizer, hand sanitizer. At the beginning of it all, we had one company in Uganda doing this. At the moment, we have over 30 companies in a space of 2 months that have started up production lines for sanitizer. Many of these have been companies that were previously involved in production of alcoholic beverages, because it was a switch that was not too far out of their reach, and so that was quick to happen. We've also moved on to repurpose lines for the production of PPEs in terms of face shields. We have companies producing biohazard bags. We have companies now producing face masks, because as of 2 days ago, it's mandatory in Uganda to wear a face mask, and over the next 2 weeks, our manufacturers are expected to produce 35 million masks, and this is work that our manufacturers are currently doing. So there have been those opportunities that have arisen. Of course, the other side of it is we've also been able to test the resilience of our manufacturing entities, because if there was ever a time to test our risk mitigation strategies, our risk management strategies, COVID-19 has been a proper test for these, and a number of companies are realizing a lot of things they need to change within their companies in order to be more resilient going forward. Beyond that, there is also the fact that as a result of this, there is a lot of international funds that have opened up to facilitate resilience and to facilitate recovery of the economy. This essentially means that financing is becoming available at a scale that was not possible before, especially for job protection, especially for PPE production and related items. This then means that the cry of access to finance is slowly diminishing, because now these funds are able to come in and step in the gap that was previously available. Of course, on the other side, still on policy, is the issue of the fact that now there is a bigger discussion on local production. We've always preached the gospel of local content and the fact that we should procure East African, especially in areas where we have developed adequate capacity. I think all across the region we are seeing moves towards the recognition that we need to build our supply chains, our internal supply chains, so that risks such as this do not create a negative impact on our economies, because we can keep supplying our items domestically. We are also seeing a lot of listenership on the part of government in terms of addressing mitigation elements that would enable our businesses and our manufacturing entities to survive. And finally, there's also the fact that we are now also seeing a lot of linkages in our manufacturing entities, where companies are working together to develop products. That was not the case. That was not at the level it is today. We're also seeing a lot of realization of substitute inputs that can be procured locally, because once the international access is closed off, then we need to turn local and identify what we can do internally. So, Lamek, I would beg to submit that, yes, there have been some advantages that have arisen out of this. Of course, like Mr. Dafa said, there is still the challenge that, of course, even when we talk about repurposing, there are costs that come along with it, and there is no guarantee of market. So those are still issues we are grappling with, but we are taking it a day at a time and trying to find ways around all these challenges.
Thank you very much, Mr. Birungi. Of course, you present quite a number of opportunities which have been brought about by COVID-19. Of course, thinking outside the box when it comes to, for example, the supply of the PPEs, the production of the sanitizers, the face masks, and so on. Actually, the products which are needed as we fight COVID-19. And what you raised is that the government of Uganda wants the manufacturing sector to supply 35 million face masks. I think this is huge, and if we're to critically analyze what this one translates into in terms of money, then we see as a very big opportunity for the manufacturing sector. And of course, trying to look at the local content, the bigger discussions. Of course, at the regional level, we've been looking at the Buy East Africa, Build East Africa, and if we are to define local content, then we define local content as being sourcing from within the region. And then the linkages you try to bring in, which have been previously missing. Probably it has been the missing point, because each one of us has been trying to look at how do I satisfy myself or my own, either in Tanzania or in Uganda or in Rwanda. So when we see an increasing level of these linkages, then at least we know that within the next period, we are looking at our manufacturing sector using this opportunity of COVID going another level. And then, of course, the import substitution. Whatever we have been importing, and we are actually able to access it within our own region, then we see this one will actually grow our manufacturing sector. But now, from your perspective again, and as we try to wind up this discussion from your perspective, what do you think would be the incentives that the manufacturing sector would feel that, of course, when I'm given this is how far I can go and probably survive this COVID era? Over to you, Mr.
Okay, thank you, Lamek. I would not necessarily call them incentives. I would more like to treat them as mitigation measures, because if we go the way of incentives, the next discussion will be that in the area of suppressed income, even for government, where will the incentives come from? So on the mitigation measures, we've already proposed a couple. Many of them are similar to what our colleagues at CTI have proposed. Some of these involve the deferral of payment of taxes that are due on, for example, imported raw materials, that are due on salaries in terms of the income tax, the individual income tax requirements. We've also proposed a reduction in the central bank rate to a level that enables resilience of the manufacturing sector post the COVID period, because we believe this can be cascaded into the commercial banks. On that one, we've been successful. I think so far there's been a reduction, but we would like a bit more. We're also looking at how we can ensure that arrears that are due to members are paid in time, so that the cash flow challenge that they're facing at the moment is quickly addressed. We're also looking at how we can work with government to, first of all, identify distressed companies within our sector, and also identify what mitigation measures can be given to them to enable them survive through this period. Because like my colleague Dafa rightly said, there's been a lot of pressure on manufacturing, resulting in decisions on labor, on downsizing labor in order for the companies to survive. The question is, what can we do for these companies to enable them go through the next few months that are coming up? The other bit is we've also engaged quite a bit with government on limiting new measures that come in, especially in light of the fact that we are now approaching the end of our financial year and moving into the next financial year. And we are speaking about how do we limit the new measures that could impact negatively on the success of businesses, especially as they try to recover from the pressures that have arisen out of COVID-19. This involves keeping to a bare minimum any new taxes on manufacturing, keeping to a bare minimum any new requirements that require additional investments, because we are talking about the fact that at this point, cash is king, and businesses are looking at retaining the cash they have to basically grow their business as lockdown eases. We're also looking at initiatives that enable the growth of the market, even as we go out of the lockdown period. Because as you would know, at the end of the day, it's even if we do all this for manufacturing, but the market is not stimulated to grow demand, we're still going to end up in the same situation, because these products that are produced have to end up somewhere. So on the market side, we are looking at elements of stimulating local demand through provision of early midterm access to perhaps social security savings for some of our savers, because then they have cash that can be spent to stimulate the economy. But we're also looking at what markets we can access even beyond our country, because if we are growing all this capacity in terms of, for example, sanitizers, face masks, PPEs, and perhaps the food production side, where are the markets that we can send some of these products to beyond Uganda, so that we can access these markets and enable our manufacturers to survive? Of course, at the EAC level, there's also the discussion on disabling the non-tariff barriers that are affecting access to different markets. And this is a discussion that I know is ongoing, and we remain hopeful that we'll get to a point where there is actual free movement of goods across East Africa, because that also is key to developing the capacity of our different manufacturing entities in our different countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Virungi, for coming up with such kind of mitigation measures, and of which key in what you point out. Of course, we'll be having an opportunity of our participants again by submitting in their questions. You talk about the elements of course, stimulating our production. You are talking of deferrals. This one has also been raised by Mr. Dafa. Of course, deferrals when it comes to, of course, like VAT, income tax, when it comes to physical policies, addressing physical policies. Of course, you are talking of, again, limiting the new measures. I think this is very, very critical. Once now, we'll be looking at this in detail. But now, allow me to invite Honorable Christopher Bazivamo, the EAC Deputy Secretary General in charge of productive and social sectors. I think as he comes in, he will be able to tell us how has the EAC promoted a coordinated approach to combat this COVID, such that we ensure that there is a recovery plan for the manufacturing sector within our region post-COVID. I think as the other panelists were introducing, Honorable Bazivamo was not yet present, and in addition to the time of the discussion, I'll give him about 2 minutes to introduce himself and then go straight away into the first question. So, karibu sana Mheshimiwa.
Thank you, and thank you, East African Community Business Council, for the invitation you have given as East Africa. I am Christopher Bazivamo, the Deputy Secretary General in charge of productive and social sectors at the East African Community level. And here I wish maybe to by saying that with this crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, all these sectors have been critically affected, being for productive sectors where you have agriculture, where you have environment, where you have tourism, where you have industry, and where you have also issues around natural resources. And for social sectors, of course, it is where you have health, and you know how our East African community citizens and our economies in general are affected. So to say at the regional level, we see this pandemic as very critical, and it has caused severe disruption in the manufacturing and industry value chain, as highlighted by my predecessor, the speakers who have spoken before me. We see that the primary sectors, the primary industry, the secondary, tertiary have really been affected. And we see also how the small and medium enterprises are seriously challenged. And this is actually severe impact of this pandemic. We have seen it coming in March, and you have seen it not only affecting the health sector, but also the trade area. And it was also
DSJ, I think we are missing you. Probably if you could work on your sound.
Sorry. I don't know where and when I was lost. But what I has highlighted is the pandemic has affected all sectors in our community, primary, secondary, tertiary, small and medium enterprises, services. And we have seen that the productive sectors not only have been affected, but also health and trade. Trade has seriously, and transport has seriously been affected. And I was saying that we have seen this coming in March, and the East African Community Secretariat and later on the community has put in place an East African Community Regional Coordination Committee on COVID-19 to come up with responses so that we can actually address the pandemic at regional level, because we have seen that there are measures which can be taken at national level, there are measures which can be taken by individual partner states, but it is needed, and it is still needed to have a regional approach addressing this pandemic and its impact. And I wish to say that this East African Community Regional Coordination Committee on COVID-19 came up with a COVID-19 response plan capturing different sectors. And this plan has been utilized actually to mobilize also funds to address some issues as a response. We have come also with other activities, like putting in place kind of regional guidelines, especially when it comes to trade facilitation, so that we see if they are implemented, kind of results which can be helpful. And we have also, as a secretariat, under our mandate in Article 71 of the treaty, prepared to organize joint Council of Ministers, where you have ministers of trade, ministers of health, East African Community Affairs and transport, so that they can discuss and put in place policy measures to help the community find solutions at regional level for this pandemic. They have met twice and later on prepared also for a summit of heads of state, which has been a consultative summit, but which has given guidance and taken given directive to ministers and to the community at whole, so that we can actually address this pandemic. One of the decisions was to ensure that at regional level we have a kind of digital surveillance tracker, and this is especially to address these problems we are facing at borders, where you have a congestion of trucks and of testing, and also to come up with some kind of regional health certificate, and also some kind of regional test result in an organized way to help actually this congestion to be held with. The issue of health, the area was to emphasize again actually measures which were taken at national level, this quarantine and 100% screening when people are entering inside, the home approach wherever it is possible. But most importantly, they have taken a decision to say it is not tenable to keep people at home, but it is important to implement measures, but ensure we are also doing local production of essential needs, especially when it comes of essential necessities like this mask, sanitizers, and others, as it has been highlighted by my previous speakers. So for decision to promote local industries, to enforce so that whatever you can produce locally has once again insisted or been highlighted, and we need actually to move forward. So they have also put in place focal points, ministers' focal points, ministers of transport, ministers of health, ministers of EAC, East African Community, were requested to meet on a regular basis to ensure they find solutions for the problems we are facing, especially when it comes to transport, when it comes to cross-border movement. So to say, there is a coordinated approach, which is very coming to supplement the national measures which are put in place, and we are, as a secretariat, trying to implement and coordinate implementation of these measures. So it means in the near future, we shall be implementing a digital surveillance tracker, especially for truck drivers, and having a common East African Community Health Certificate, meaning partner states will be agreeing on designated testing facilities which have a common protocol, and where they will be having what we call mutual recognition, so that the problem of testing will not be a big challenge for truck drivers, and this congestion at the borders will be reduced. And we will be having regular meetings, planned one like next week. Many ministers will meet of transport, ministers of health, and ministers of in charge of East African Community Affairs, to come up with an assessment of the situation and also give new guidelines on how we move forward as a community. So to say, this is what we have done so far when it comes to regional approach. We have done also using this East African Community COVID-19 response plan, being able to mobilize some funds from the African Development Bank, from Trade Mark East Africa, from the German government, so that we can facilitate some activities which are needed, especially when it comes to free movement of people, and also for when it comes to health. In the health sector, we have been now delivering mobile laboratories with equipment and all necessary laboratories items to help partner states test wherever it is possible so that you can know how we stand as countries in addition to what countries were doing so far. So this is one, but we have also begun training of all staff at airports. By the time training are being done in Kenya, and they are planned to be done in 8 airports we have in East Africa for the staff to ensure things to be done adequately, and preparing for the resumption of the aviation industry, because airports will not be closed forever. It is important we prepare staff at the airport so that they can handle movement of people without spreading this kind of pandemic. So to say, this is what I wanted to highlight. If any other questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Vazivamo, DSG East African Community Secretariat in charge of productive and social sectors. You've ably taken us through how the sector has been affected, and even went further to even brief us on how even the social sectors has been affected. Of course, looking at both the primary, secondary, and the tertiary sectors, SMEs who have been seriously affected, and of course informing us that there is a regional coordination committee which has been put in place by the community. And this committee has come up with a response plan to address COVID-19. And you also informing us that there are already guidelines which have been put across by the Secretariat. And these guidelines can either be applied at the regional level as well as specific ones which are to the partner states. And something, of course, which is critical, you've told us that you are working on a digital surveillance tracker, for example, to support with the cross-border movement of goods. Of course, as you very well know, we have had challenges as a business community when it comes to crossing goods as a result of some measures which have been introduced by partner states. Issues around relay driving, paying some kind of fee to be escorted, and again waiting for results, which sometimes have been taking about 1 day, 2 days. Today we're hearing from reports across the partner states that even some are taking 5 days, not just 5 days. And sometimes for you to be cleared, you have to pay a bribe. So these are reports which we are freshly getting and which we are actually receiving from our partner states as EABC Secretariat on a daily basis. And of course, the decision, one of the decisions of this, for example, the Sectoral Council on Health and other ministries like EAC and Trade, which have come up with, is to promote local production, setting up focal points within the partner states. And then at the future, you are also informing us that you are looking at having a common health certificate, of course, which comes from designated testing facilities within the region. And then, of course, having these regular meetings to update for the partner states to update themselves on what is actually happening. And then you conclude by commenting on the health sector of what you have done as Secretariat in terms of providing mobile laboratories to the EAC partner states, even not just labs alone, but even the testing kits, the training staff at the airports and other points of entry. And then looking forward to the resumption of the airline industry, because COVID cannot make us not to move, but how do we now equip our personnel at these points of entry to be prepared to address COVID-related challenges. And if I look at my second question, which I was supposed to pose to you, actually you have addressed some of the issues or some of the measures which needed to be put in place. Probably let's touch a little bit on the impact of this COVID on the implementation of the industrialization policy 2012 to 2032, and how do we sustain intra-EAC trade? As you know, we have targets. You know, we have an industrialization strategy of 20 years. And you know, COVID is now coming in, and it's almost, we are almost 7 months, 6 months into this pandemic, and we do not know whether it will end tomorrow or the other day. How do we ensure that we are on course for our industrialization policy as well as sustain intra-EAC trade? Karibu sana Mheshimiwa.
So thank you. Let me say that industry has been affected, as I have said it at the beginning. And we have witnessed actually like closing some industries temporarily, this being the effect of stay-home policy. We have seen a problem of free movement of people because in some areas public transport were stopped. And we have also seen this issue of people who are losing in the community. And we say it is important, while we are thinking of resuming our industries here and there, to keep in mind that the COVID is still there, and yet then we need kind of strong sensitization, awareness creation to ensure wherever industries are working, appropriate measures to protect workers are taken. And for this, we have also been able to mobilize some kind of funds and targeting risk communication and community engagement program. And this will be done through the National Red Cross, coordinated by the International Red Cross, working with the ministries in charge of health. Some money have been availed, and the partner state will be actually ensuring that this sensitization is done to eliminate, first of all, kind of stigmatization which we see here and there, especially on recoveries or on truck drivers, but also to put people to implement seriously preventive measures to avoid actually the spread of these viruses, and then to ensure industries are working. So, as I said, as the industries have been affected, this has actually affected also the implementation of the industrialization policy, where we see that in some areas, actually, this year, we could have lost about even up to 20% of what was supposed to be received, in other areas up to 30%. And this is due especially from a reduction in household and business spending, in consumption, due to this disruption of supply chain for key inputs in machinery and chemicals. So all this will have actually a serious impact on our industrialization policy. And I wish to say that we have to take, as partner states, appropriate measures to redress what we are facing on the market side, what we are facing when it comes to transport, what we are facing in the industry, in the tourism industry, where we have
recommending the ideas from our so that you can share with the Ghana country director.
them today, I have not been hard, but I say we need to improve our climate. We need to
I think I will have to attach it.
have
So if there's anything you want to amend,
by putting place or developing some attractive incentive for investors, being local or international. We have to ensure we promote actually technology transfer, but also to focus. You have seen that digital infrastructure is now being used seriously to achieve many activities, and we think we have to invest more in that area. And we have, as said by my colleague from Uganda, to come up very quickly on elimination of non-tariff barriers and ensure we are enhancing trade facilitation to reduce the complexities and the losses we are facing in this trade by the time being. And this is very important if we want to sustain and try to achieve what was planned in our industrialization policy 2032. But we have really to take new policies and to take appropriate measures to mitigate the challenges we are facing and to put more input in whatever you are doing so that you ensure that you are not really hindered seriously. The problems are there, but for solutions also can be found. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, DSG, for that perspective and, of course, commenting on our industrial strategy. Let me go straight to Dr. Stephen Kagbo, the UNIDO representative to EAC, Tanzania, and Mauritius. From a global perspective, how has Africa and EAC in particular been affected by COVID-19 pandemic? And from, again, your perspective, what are some of these lessons which we can draw from COVID-19? You're much welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for allowing me at this time. I'll be very brief. I see that we are running short of time. I think one thing is very clear. As we all know, COVID-19 is turning the world downside up, so to speak, and Africa is not an exemption. We see the impact of COVID across the world, across sectors, from homes to hotels, from farms to factories, from mining to manufacturing to markets. The impacts are really, really vivid. And the difficult thing is that almost every week we see new numbers and new records being set. And it's very difficult to follow specific numbers because they keep changing. But we know for sure that global merchandise, for example, is by the second quarter of this year, is going to fall, predicted to fall by at least 30%. And that means it will be never before since the record of global marketing commodities existed. So this is a huge threat globally. It's a huge threat to Africa. And as some of the colleagues already who spoke before me emphasized, like in Tanzania, they have done specific surveys. In Uganda, they have done specific surveys. And they have zoomed down or zoomed into specific effects for particular industries. But of course, we know the impact has not been only on industries. We see that globally, the closure of schools, for example, has affected at least 1.6 billion school-going children across the world. We see that potentially many more, almost 60 million people are going to be driven further into poverty in addition to what already exists. We see the loss in employment, which is being quantified, probably could be in the figures of over 300 million full-time jobs being lost and counting. So this is a major challenge, and I think that the whole of Africa and EAC are bracing themselves. I think that from what we have heard and from what we see, governments are taking actions, private sector entities are taking actions, manufacturers are taking actions, and I think we certainly need to do more. Major things that we see is that the disruption in the supply chain has suddenly reminded us of the types of dependencies that we have created or that have been created because of the business models and the manufacturing models and the marketing models that have been practiced for years. We see, for instance, that suddenly Africa's dependence on imported inputs has shaken the manufacturing base because the inputs are no longer coming, and that means manufacturing companies are suffering. We see also Africa's dependence, and for that matter, EAC also dependence on exports has also shaken the African economies because the demand has suddenly slumped for our commodities. So these are major challenges in EAC, for instance. The figures show that the imports of inputs within the sub-region is barely 6%, meaning 94% is dependent on imports from outside the EAC region. So this spells, well, let me not say doom, but it's a major challenge. Yes, there are some opportunities, there are some positive impacts that we can count on, but these ones, if we're not careful, will easily be swept by the major impacts that we are experiencing. So, and I think that this brings back home some very important lessons, some very important issues that we need to look at, some of which I would say UNIDO has been advocating for years. And I think we would renew our call to countries in the developing world to look at the importance of inclusive and sustainable industrial development. Inclusivity in the sense that making sure that no one is left behind, making sure sufficient space is provided for women and for the very poor, and for that matter, even the youths. This is very critical going forward. And there are policy instruments to make sure that happens. Perhaps later we can talk about some of the policy measures that countries can utilize. But we call also for the diversification of African economies. I already mentioned that the reliance on export has exposed the vulnerabilities of our economy. This has not started because of COVID. We simply realized it as a result of the COVID. Perhaps it's been a wake-up call, if I may put it that way. But African economies and economies in the EAC need to diversify the economy, need to add value, more value in the products that we have, in the primary products that we export, which means we are exporting a lot of value and of course and jobs. This is well known everywhere. And we see that we are already probably in many countries beginning to sense negative growth, and Africa is projected to enter into a recession, perhaps for the first time in 25 years. So I think this calls for a serious dialogue between the governments, between private sector players, between the manufacturing associations. It's very good that the EAC Secretariat has been a very useful platform for coordination, has been a very important platform for bringing together different players, for dealing with issues on trade. As some of my colleagues already mentioned, some of the issues around non-tariff barriers, especially. We see the challenges, and these ones have been dealt with. So as UNIDO, yes, we recognize that the challenges that have been experienced around the world are probably not very different from what we experience in Africa, but more so in Africa, these have become pronounced because of the structure of our economies, the dependence on exportation of raw produce, and the dependence on importation of manufacturing inputs. So I think for me, this is one major area I would love to highlight. And I think I would like to underscore, as I already said, some of the messages that UNIDO has always been preaching, if I may put it that way. Yes, the diversification message, the value addition. I remember in 2012 with the African Union Commission, even at that time, as early as that time, helped to prepare the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa. And some countries took this and tried to domesticate this manufacturing plan for Africa. And today we recognize also that in these circumstances, we all wish that we had a very strong pharmaceutical base to help deal with the health-related challenges. But of course, all is not lost. There's still opportunities, and there's a lot more that can be done by manufacturers and by governments to see that we don't get swept away by this pandemic, which, as it appears, is not going away today, neither is it going away tomorrow. It's probably here to stay. Even if it goes away, it's clear that the world has to be prepared in a sense that pandemics can strike at any time. So like somebody said recently, if that be the case, then we better have our shock absorbers ready so that these shocks, economic shocks and health shocks can be contained in any economy, including the EAC region. So for a moment, let me just say these few remarks and perhaps hope that in a second inning, I can go to some of the specific policy measures that can be taken by regional economic communities, by governments, perhaps also, I would say, by private manufacturers themselves, including small and medium enterprises. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think let me allow you to go straight into some of the policy measures and specifically what UNIDO is looking at. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I started by saying that we continue now to advocate the resurgence of industrial policy making. We know that there was an era where industrial policy making was perhaps subsumed and put to the side more than ever before. The importance of industrial policy has now come to the fore. So we would advocate the preparation of solid industrial policies and programs for countries. And in UNIDO, we have the instruments, we have the technical expertise to support governments to help them prepare such policies and programs that will support diversification, as I already mentioned, that will support structural transformation in favor of manufacturing, policies that will support value addition, especially to strengthen regional value chains, and policies that will promote investment in infrastructure, investment in energy, and investment in technology, not forgetting the important role of micro, small, and medium enterprises, because we have to recognize that majority of the businesses in the sub-region are medium, small, and micro enterprises. So I think specifically it's important to call on the international community. People have already mentioned this. It's important to look at increasing the financial space for governments to play their role. And part of this has been the call to help relieve the debt of African countries. I think the African Union made a very important move to appoint envoys to support the negotiation of African countries to secure significant debt relief, perhaps even debt cancellation. And this will help governments to then have the muscle or the fiscal space to be able to provide the liquidity required by businesses in the country. Don't forget, one of the major channels that governments can play in supporting the manufacturing sector in every country is through the channel of procurement. Governments are among the major buyers, and in every country we had in the Ugandan presentation that for the government has, for instance, given a contract to private manufacturers to produce, was it 35 million units of masks, for example. So examples like that, I think, can be undertaken by government. And this is not limited only to COVID-19 related supplies. It can be expanded to all forms of procurement to support or to help kickstart local manufacturing, use of local products. This is an important element that I think should be advocated. Government sets rules, and therefore, in these rules that they set, they can help ease the business environment. And this has been, I know in Tanzania, for instance, for years, they have been working on improving the business environment through the blueprint that they have adopted. We saw very recently the Bank of Tanzania introducing very important liquidity measures to help businesses perform better. So these are some of the measures we would like to advocate. And for small, or let me say for manufacturers, it's important that repurposing is being considered. And some already have jumped into the bandwagon of repurposing. Of course, it has challenges. To repurpose has, unless those manufacturers who are already producing commodities that are very close to the new opportunities that have arisen, it can present itself as a major challenge. But kudos to those that are already in this pathway. But I think that many more companies have to consider this possibility. Repurposing in the sense of products, but repurposing also in the sense of more digitalization. We have seen that within this COVID, we have recognized how technology can be very useful. And for those companies, for those firms that are less IT or that are less digitalized, we see that probably the impact is heavier on those. So companies, private sector producers would have to invest a bit more on IT solutions, on IT technologies, a bit more on innovation, and to help create new business models. As after COVID, the world will never be the same again. So these are among some of the policy tracks that I think should be followed. And I would especially underscore the path on diversification and the path on value addition related to regional value chains in the sub-region here in EAC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen Kagbo, for those key policy interventions, which will be looking at us as a way of ensuring that we mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the EAC manufacturing sector. Let me now go to Madam Mary Ngechu, who is an EABC director and also representing the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Madam Ngechu, in your perspective, how are SMEs, particularly in the manufacturing sector, coping with COVID-19? Karibu sana, Madam Ngechu.
Thank you, Lamek. For the SME, I think they have been affected like any other manufacturer in the sector. But for SMEs, usually they have unique needs because of their businesses maybe being small. And they've been affected across like all the other manufacturers. I would maybe talk about how SMEs have been affected in the production because they operate with low-scale production capacity. Most of them, their factories or their production are not fully automated. And with the new regulations now that require most of them to work remotely from home, this has not been impossible. And then also the fact that they run with little liquidities for their businesses in terms of cash flow. Beginning of COVID, we saw an increased rise of raw material in terms of pricing. We also saw the major manufacturers buying in bulk so that they can be able to mitigate the unpredicted path of the COVID-19, which most of the SMEs are not able to do. That means that most of them, then they ended up buying their raw material from maybe brokers, and their raw material comes in more expensive for them. So this reduces their cash flow, and most of them also, they were not able to sustain their workforce because a lot of their workforce is manual. Then that affected their production. I would also talk about how logistics has affected the SMEs, especially because they produce again in small scale and not in bulk. So in terms of movement of their products and their goods, it becomes too expensive for them. It doesn't make sense for them to transport small quantities across bigger distances. So it becomes too expensive for them. Then they were also affected a lot by loss of market, especially with most countries closure for restaurants, the bars, a lot of social places where most of the SMEs do supply for the supply chain is most SMEs. Then I would also say with the new workforce protocols that were put in terms of social distances, curfew, reducing the working hours that are required to work. Then also the regulatory that premises and manufacturing entities have to comply with the COVID-19 requirements, which means that they have to give their employees PPEs, they have to give them sanitizers and all that, which is an extra cost for them. Most of them have been affected by that, and they have not been able to work on that. However, most of SMEs, again, also like what the other manufacturers have done, they've come up with different ways of how they can be able to respond to these challenges. And some of them have been forced to reduce cost by reducing their workforce. Again, sending their casuals or sending some of their employees home. Others have been forced to introduce production of the essential goods, things like the sanitizers and the mask, like what every other person has done. Others have been forced to negotiate the supply chain to be able to give them a bit of credits. Others have been able to negotiate and work with banks to reorganize how they pay up their loans. Others have been able to renegotiate with the customers so that they're able to be paid cash instead of maybe giving goods in credits. And others have been able, so that they're able to meet with the expensive costs of production they have. With the new technology, with the new way that the COVID-19 has forced people, especially to do marketing now and communicating, a lot of SMEs have been able to either equip themselves or get into online platforms. A lot of them have been selling on Facebook, Twitter, and all that, but a lot of them had not been able to organize themselves in a good way so that they are able to position themselves in this platform. So these are new measures that I have seen. The SMEs have been affected, and they have tried to look for ways in how they can be able to mitigate this COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you very much, Madam Mary Ngechu, for sharing with us how the SMEs have been affected. Of course, you talked about operating with low-scale production, scaling down on their labor force, increasing in the price of the raw materials, loss of market, of course, as a result of several measures which the governments have put in place, and also saying that even SMEs have repurposed some of their production lines to produce some of these essential items. I think this is very, very critical. And then you are talking about how even the SMEs, in terms of marketing, have taken advantage of the online platforms, the social medias, you talk of Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, and so on, to market some of their products. Probably getting into my second question, what would you propose from an SME perspective as being some of the key stimulus interventions that the SMEs will be expecting to recover?
My proposal would be in two areas. mostly the government and also the private sector. And what I think that from the government side, some of the areas that we can be able to put up as mitigation for this is a lot of people talk about emergency rescue fund for the SMEs. We are all talking about emergency rescue fund for the businesses, but on my perception for the SMEs, it needs to be specific that as much as the government are giving a lot of incentives to help the manufacturers to be able to mitigate the problems that are going through, we need to have an intentional, purposeful or specific provision for the SMEs. When we are also talking about how it is that we can be able to come up with markets, I'm happy from what the last panelist has talked about. The government need also maybe to make a provision for buying specific for SME. We have seen this done for youth and women. So there is need that we could be able to make a provision that at this basket is basically just for the SME. We also need to be purposeful and create awareness so that we are able to communicate and enlighten the SMEs where these opportunities are, because sometimes we get a lot of opportunities that are given or incentives that are given by the government, but the SMEs are not aware. So there need to be a focus on awareness for the SMEs so that we are able to enlighten them on where the opportunities are. The other area that I think the government is able to help would be maybe in evaluating the tax reliefs, where in terms of maybe zero rating or VAT exemption for essential products, like mostly in the pharmaceutical, on the hygiene that we are working on, we should also maybe look in reevaluating the regulatory overreach, especially for compliance approvals for the SMEs. We should maybe come up with a compliance program where we are able to grow and help the SMEs to comply other than closing them down. We should also be able to encourage them on voluntary disclosure of their revenues or their operations for work. We should be able to come up with alternative dispute resolutions, especially for the SMEs, so that we're able to guide them. We should also be able to come up with reasonable and procedural fair action where we have SMEs not being able to comply with the regulator or the requirements of the law. We should also consider subsiding the cost of COVID-19 compliance in terms like the testing of the employees. I have seen like in the restaurants where we require now that, like in Kenya, for the restaurants to be opened, the people are expected to pay for the testing of their employees, which sometimes it is too expensive. There's some provision that has been given, but a lot of other private entities, hospitals are not honoring that. Provision for PPEs, which is required maybe at the workforce of the SMEs, and adequate supplies of water so that they are able to comply with the COVID-19 requirements as per now. We should also consider to provide a moratorium on charges of taxes so that if SMEs, because they are suffering from cash flow, are we able to help them with a moratorium on how it is that they would be able to pay their taxes. For the private sector, my thoughts are that the private sector, especially the big manufacturers, should be open and willing, helpful to help the SMEs in areas like component manufacturing, where if I am an example, like if it is textile, I have seen that companies do that. If I have different elements that I need to complete a production of a product, is it possible that we can be able to outsource those component manufacturing from the SMEs? Is it possible that we are also able to give or extend credit facilities for the SMEs, and also maybe come up with contract manufacturing, allow the SMEs to be able to use our facility if we have excess in production capacity so that we can be able to engage them in contract manufacturing. We should also be willing to put them on our value chain. We should be purposeful for the private sector to include the SMEs in their supply chain. So I also think that, especially also with other partners, we need to come up with a business development program for the SMEs, because as much as we work on the policies and help on our policies, the SMEs lack a lot of capacity that we need to be purposeful on how it is that we help them to develop in their businesses. These are some of the areas that I think we could be able to intervene for mitigation for the SMEs growth.
Thank you very much, Madam Mary Ngechu, for these key mitigation measures and for specifically targeting the SMEs. I think you had touched on e-commerce, how the SMEs are taking advantage of platforms such as what you mentioned, the social media and so on. As you very well know, that the SMEs are quite a number who have actually engaged themselves in online marketing and so on. So how do we ensure that we keep them sustainable and to keep enabling manufacturing? Of course, whatever they are marketing online is coming from the manufacturing sector. So how do we make them, how do we keep this momentum to ensure that it's sustainable?
As I had mentioned earlier, most of the SMEs, because they produce in small scale, then it is very easy for them to sell on e-commerce, on social media, Twitter, and the other e-commerce that have been provided across the region. However, most of them, they lack digital marketing strategy in how to position their products across the e-commerce platform. And they also like the strategy to even just create awareness to let the consumers know that their products are on the platform. So for me, it's an area that we need to come up with measures on how we can be able to help the SMEs so that they are able to develop and understand on how it is that they can be able to create their digital marketing strategies. They also lack data analysis. That way, they are not able to simply understand their consumer behavior, and they are not able to make informed decisions even in product development or how it is that they would be able to improve their product. It's also an area that we can be able to help them. They lack also competitiveness in price, because I've said producing in small scale, that means their cost of production is expensive. So we need to think on how it is that we can be able to mitigate their production cost. What incentives can we be able to give them so that they're able to work on that? Then there's a need in reducing the logistics cost, especially for deliveries from the online platform. When you purchase your product from the e-commerce platform, there's need for that product to be delivered. And if you're buying one product, or you only have maybe one or two products, then you're not able to fill a basket so that you can be able to share the cost of the products across. And an example, if I'm buying maybe a lotion from a body lotion from an online platform that costs 300 and it requires me to pay 200 for that product to be delivered for me, then it means that I'm not able to be competitive on that platform. In my opinion, we need to simply just improve the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem of e-commerce, and so that we can be able to improve trade across the region and international, develop trade across the regional markets and the international market. We need to come up with mechanism in reducing the logistics cost for delivery across the e-commerce platform. We need to come up with measures of how it is that the government, or maybe in this sector, there's need to develop measures of making sure that we are a security system for ensuring that the product and the services that are offered on the e-commerce have been taken care of. And then also a clear regulatory of compliance on business transactions across the e-commerce. The SMEs will not have an understanding, like even how are they supposed to file their taxes of the product that they transact across the e-commerce, and this then later becomes a regulatory problem for them. So a lot of effort on education, awareness, and helping the SMEs to understand this area would be helpful so that we can be able to create and keep the e-commerce business sustainability on the e-commerce platforms.
Thank you very much, Madam Mary Ngechu, for these insights on e-commerce and how the SMEs can sustain, especially in enabling the manufacturing sector. Time is always never our best ally, but we will try as much to ensure that within the time which we're given of 2 hours. So now allow me go into the question and answer. I will open my questions here directed to specific panelists. Question number 1, that I understand there is no lockdown. These are questions coming from the participants. I understand no lockdown has been done, unlike in some other EAC partner states. Was there any clear comparative advantage, really, given that as a region, we suffered the same import supply chain disruptions, which resulted actually in all partner states looking for internal local alternative sourcing of raw materials? I think this one, as the DSG EAC would be wrapping up, I think he will try to comment on this. Then question number 2, what are some of the major raw materials that Tanzanian SMEs sourced during COVID-19 pandemic, and what would you recommend moving forward to ensure that we rather develop strong regional value supply chains within the EAC? I think this one will be going to Mr. Dafa. And then the other question is, okay, this is a continuation. Targeting a relationship between China and Africa, any impact failed or worsened by the presenters, be it negative or positive, especially importation of goods or FDI from a Chinese government. I think this addition here can be a supplement to our panelists as they wind up. And then I think Dr. Kagbo had raised his hand. As you wind up in the final 2 minutes, which I'll be giving to each panelist, I think you also try to raise some of the issues you had wanted to raise. So we have about 13 minutes to 4 o'clock. Let me invite Honorable Vazivamo to comment on the first question. And then later, I will invite Mr. Dafa to comment, and then I will pick it up from there. As we wind up, the CEO of East African Business Council, Honorable Mathuki, will also be giving us some of the closing remarks. So, Honorable Vazivamo, karibu sana to comment on the question and also as we wind up in about 2 minutes.
So thank you, EABC. Let me say that if we could speak in general terms, all East African community has actually faced a kind of lockdown. If it was not done internally, it has been done at another level, where we see that flight from outside were not actually coming from there with raw material or with other goods to come in East Africa. And then internally, we have also seen that this kind of lockdown has so hindered transport somehow, and this impacting actually whichever industry needed was not able to be found adequately or timely. Because when you see that throughout our borders, we face kind of condition which can cause for trucks to be there for more than 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Whichever case, it will affect our industries wherever they are. And I say that this cannot be a solution for a long time. It means it is something which can be done in a certain period, but we all need at a long term, a long run, to open for businesses to continue and to ensure that raw material is available for our industries here and there. So I wish to say that we see also a move in our region, in our partner state, and even at the international level, a move to open and to take appropriate measures to live with the pandemic in a way where we ensure safety of our citizens and then continue businesses. And we have to build what we can call resilience and see how partnership can respond adequately to fight against COVID, but also at the same time ensure continuity of businesses, being industry, trade, in transport and other areas in services, so that we can keep living. Otherwise, the solution will not be for a long term looking down. And we have actually to emphasize on what we call awareness creation, sensitization, building responsibilities, because everyone has to be responsible. And when everyone has taken its own measure for right measures and implement them, and we keep discipline, it is the way actually we can ensure we keep living. And as the pandemic will be always there for a long time, we have to build resilience and ensure we move forward. So to say, I wish to once again thank you for the meeting, and I wish to say that it is important as a region to think regionally, because it will be difficult to fight against this pandemic if we are isolated and working individually as partner states. And it is important we actually look through regional solutions, accept them, and implement them the same way, especially when we speak about intra-trade and international trade and free movement of people and goods throughout the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Bazivamo, for your concluding remarks. And of course, we appreciate your valuable time to participate. Straight away, let me go to Mr. Dafa. Mr. Dafa, karibu sana.
I think I'll try to respond to the question. Based on our survey, unfortunately, we did not diagnose critically on the types of industries, but we had just sectors. So based on that initial assessment, most of the sectors that sourced locally due to COVID-19 were mainly from food, beverages, and tobacco. Some of them are producing, I would say, bottled water, and some are producing soda. So we believe some of these materials could be, it's just an assumption, it could be industrial sugar or something else that they would add into their production. But others are mainly in chemical industries. So we believe now most of the industries that we are repurposing would have sourced some of the alcohol and other raw materials to produce sanitizers that are available locally. But overall, I think this will be part of my concluding remarks. I think most of our initial assessments allude to the need for further assessment of these sectors, especially the manufacturing sector, which sectors have been affected, and what kind of factors have been resilient to some of those industries that have continued to survive despite the pandemic. So it's a call to all of us as regional associations and as EABC to try to gather resources to assess the problem further, so that we can have more policy directive informed proposals to the government. But also, I just wanted to respond to a small question raised by one of the participants on Rusumo border. So he alluded to the fact that some of these measures have already been removed. But for me, I just reported what was given to me by my member. So I think despite the fact that some of these restrictive measures have been relaxed, but they indeed affected business. So there's a need to have harmony and there's a need to have a common sense when it comes to taking these measures, especially across, especially on cross-border trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dafa. Maybe in 2 minutes, the Executive Director of Uganda Manufacturing Association, as you wind up, 2 minutes, Karibu.
Thank you very much, Lamek. Now, mine is really two things. Number one is I think it's commendable what has been able to be done by our manufacturers across the region to rise to the challenge. Like the former speakers said, there are definitely disruptions in supply chain, and there are definitely disruptions in day-to-day business for manufacturers that they have to be aware of as we move forward. The period post-COVID-19 is never going to be the same as that before. There's a lot of expenditure that is coming in, and I think my appeal is to the EAC to ensure that there's a harmonized approach to enabling the growth of manufacturing within the region. One of the key things is the issue of NTBs and the need to fast-track solutions to these NTBs so that there is never a case where an East African product fails to get into the other country. This should be resolved as fast as possible. The other bit perhaps is also to ask that we as manufacturing entities, as business membership organizations, need to be at the forefront of campaigning for the consumption of local, and by local I mean East African, local products within our respective countries, because we need to support manufacturing to grow, and manufacturing can only grow when there is adequate market for the products that are produced. The SMEs are struggling to generate new products, but if these products are not appreciated in the markets they are sent into, we are killing these SMEs and we are killing the jobs that they would otherwise create. But otherwise, I'd like to thank the EABC for organizing this, and to all our listeners and watchers, we would like to appreciate them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Virunji. Madam Mary Ngechu, in your final remarks, just in 2 minutes, Karibu.
Thank you, Ram. I think my final remark will be that COVID-19 crisis should be a wake-up call for us as manufacturers and as the member state across the region. We need to ask ourselves, what are we manufacturing? What are we importing? And what can we manufacture with the help of the government so that we position ourselves as manufacturers to manufacture those things that we require. Instead of importing, we invest with the help of the government that we are able to manufacture and be able to build capacity for the requirements of the region.
Thank you very much. Maybe there's somebody who has not muted their mic. Thank you very much, Madam Mary Ngechu. Let me invite Dr. Stephen Kagbo from UNIDO to give his final sentiments.
Okay, thank you very much, EABC, for this very brilliant opportunity, and thanks to all the participants for listening to us. I want to just make a couple of practical points, because I think that I raised my hand when Mary was speaking, because she touched on a very important point, and I will go back to it because one of the actions I advocated for relates to procurement that should be directed to local manufacturing entities. The criticism that has always come from government side, or that I've heard from government side, it relates to three things: QQT, quantity, quality, and timing of supplies. And I think to address these criticisms, it's important that small and medium enterprises go further to form clusters and consortia. That would be an important way to help address the issue of capacity, to help address the issue of production to scale. So I would just mention that as an important element that I think manufacturers associations and other bodies should consider from their side. How can they position themselves to take advantage of government's big muscle in terms of promoting local procurement. The second point I want to make, there are a few on the BDS program. I know that there was a question about whether there are programs to support business development services. I would like to refer you to some of the products that we have on the UNIDO website. There's one recent one that relates to, we provided guidelines for medium, small, and micro, small, and medium enterprises for post-COVID recovery. So I think you can see some tips there. I would not go into any details, but let me invite you to look at UNIDO's website. Third is, I'm aware, for instance, the economic processing zones that have been established in some of the countries, or industrial processing zones. In some countries, I think there is a 80-20% divide that allows those companies to export 80% outside the EAC and only 20% within the EAC, meaning every other country in EAC is considered domestic. I think within this COVID and perhaps post-COVID, it will be important to look at some of these regulations and allow these companies that have been trapped, that can no longer really export, to be able to also export in the domestic market. And finally, I would like to say that in this case of the regional value chains, I think it's important to consider some level of specialization. Now, it may be specialization along the value chain, or it may be specialization with respect to specific products. And I think this is where the coordination within EAC can be very useful. If every country then ends up producing or manufacturing the same product, then you clearly see where we have challenges because of the homogeneity in the type of products we have. So some level of specialization should be sought to make it broadly competitive and appetizing for the entire EAC sub-region. Thank you very much for your attention, and this was a real privilege to interact with all of you. Thank you. Is anybody still speaking? I don't seem to hear anyone else after I handed over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kakbo. This is Geoffrey Kamanzi. I think Lamek's microphone has had a hitch, but I thank you so much for the kind remarks, closing remarks. And if no other submission, closing remark, I would wish to do closing remarks on behalf of the ED. Dr. Peter has not been able to join this very important discussion. He's in a ministerial meeting to sort out a few other issues that are available, that have presented themselves during this period. But we will definitely brief him on how the meeting has gone, and requested me to do closing remarks on his behalf.
Maybe 15 seconds. We, on behalf of those who participated, I think we need to, to thank the presenters. The presentation were very useful, very informative, and the mitigation measures they have proposed, they are very good. As technicians, we shall look into those issues, and we are looking forward really to implementing everything that has been said. Thank you. I'm Jean-Baptiste Avugimana. I'm from East African Community Secretariat. I'm Director of Productive Sectors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Hello. Thank you so much for that. And we, as the discussion went on, and I think it was important that manufacturing is one of the key backbones of most of the EAC partner states. Much as has been damaged, but also there has been a lot of opportunities that have been presented by the outbreak of the pandemic. So the opportunities that have been presented, I think, as Madam Meringeshu mentioned, they need a lot of care. They need to be sustained so that they can enhance or enable the link between the manufacturers and the consumers. So we need to really look at how, as governments or as also business organizations, help these SMEs to ensure that sustainable, the ably sustainable. Also, we need to emphasize that the EAC coordination approach is a very important factor to ensure that there is a concerted and combined efforts to combat, to fight this common enemy. It is a common enemy that has attacked all of us, and when it attacks one of us, definitely it will. The other one is also not safe. So we commend the EAC Secretariat for the combined efforts that they have put together to ensure that there's a combined front line that is inclusive of different sector players. Also, as Dr. Kagbo says, there is to regulation. There's need for help in investment in the partner states. So these are facets that we take from this meeting, and the fact that we also need to fight that the NTBs that have been introduced that we see keep cropping up are fought so that cargo can flow and trade can resume post-COVID. So thank you very much, dear panelists. Thank you so much, attendees, whoever has been around and has contributed. These are a few series of the webinar arrangements that we're organizing. We're organizing more going forward, and we hope that the ideas that come out of these discussions will actually inform policymakers and as well as the private sector to ensure that we have combined effort in trying to recover and cushion our businesses from this adverse effect that they have faced. Thank you so much on behalf of the ED and on behalf of all my members, and I thank you, the EABC team, for putting this together, and we hope that you have yourself a safe evening. Please stay safe, and we thank you so much. God bless you.
So God bless you too. Nice evening.
Thank you, Honorable. Otherwise, bye-bye. Have a good day.
Nice evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.